The morning I finally threw away my daughter's baby shoes was the morning I realized I had been mourning the wrong person for 23 years. My name is Helen, and I am 71 years old. For most of my adult life, people have described me as devoted, selfless, the kind of mother who would do anything for her children. What they didn't see was how that devotion had slowly consumed every other part of who I used to be. Catherine was my only child, born after years of trying and 3 heartbreaking miscarriages. When she finally arrived, I felt like my life's true purpose had begun. Harold, my husband, was a good man but distant. The real love affair of my life was with motherhood itself, and Catherine was at the center of everything. From the beginning, Catherine was demanding in ways that seemed almost intentional. As a toddler, she would throw spectacular tantrums that could only be soothed by my complete attention. Other children might be distracted by toys or snacks, but Catherine required my physical presence, my voice, my undivided focus. When Catherine started school, I became the mother who volunteered for everything. I organized fundraisers, chaperoned field trips, stayed up late helping with projects that were clearly beyond a 7-year-old's capabilities. Catherine was bright but never seemed to apply herself unless I was sitting right beside her, guiding every step. The pattern continued through high school. Catherine would start projects with enthusiasm, then abandon them when they became difficult, knowing I would step in to fix whatever needed fixing. I found myself making phone calls to teachers about Catherine's grades, to parents about social conflicts, to coaches about playing time. Harold began to express concern when Catherine was 16. He told me that I was teaching Catherine that she didn't need to be responsible for her own problems, because I would always be there to solve them. I bristled at the suggestion, insisting that supporting my daughter was what good mothers did. College was supposed to be Catherine's chance to develop independence, but instead it became an opportunity for our codependent relationship to evolve. She called me multiple times a day, often in tears about roommate conflicts, difficult professors, or social situations she couldn't navigate. I found myself driving to campus every few weeks to help with laundry, clean her room, or provide emotional support. When Catherine struggled academically, I hired a tutor. When she had trouble with her roommate, I called the housing office. When she ran out of money, I supplemented her allowance without telling Harold. Catherine changed majors 3 times in 4 years, each time convinced that external factors beyond her control had derailed her previous choice. After graduation, Catherine moved back home to figure out her next steps. What was supposed to be temporary stretched into months, then a year. She worked part-time retail jobs that never seemed to work out because of unreasonable managers or difficult customers. I became a buffer between her and Harold, smoothing over conflicts, making excuses for her behavior. When Catherine finally moved out at 25, it was into an apartment I helped her find and largely furnished. I co-signed her lease, provided the security deposit, and spent weeks helping her set up her new space. The next few years followed a predictable pattern. Catherine would call in crisis about rent money, car repairs, job problems, or relationship drama, and I would respond with advice, emotional support, and often financial assistance. Harold retired when I was 68, and suddenly he was home all day, witnessing the full extent of my daily involvement in Catherine's life. He began to point out patterns I had been too close to see clearly. He told me that our daughter was 32 years old and still functioning like a teenager because I had never allowed her to develop adult coping skills. I began to notice things I had been unconsciously ignoring. Catherine never thanked me for the help I provided, she simply expected it. She never asked about my life, my health, my interests. Our conversations were entirely focused on her problems, her needs, her emotional state. I realized that I had become not a mother but a service provider. The breaking point came on Catherine's 34th birthday. I had planned a small celebration, spending 2 days cooking and decorating. Catherine arrived late and immediately began complaining about traffic, her job, her landlord. She criticized the food I had prepared and was dismissive of the gift I had carefully chosen. The final straw came when Catherine noticed that I had invited the Hendersons, our longtime neighbors. She became furious, accusing me of making her birthday about other people instead of focusing on what she needed. She said their presence was stressing her out, and they left early, clearly uncomfortable. That night, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by the remnants of the party and asked myself when was the last time Catherine had done something thoughtful for me. or express genuine gratitude for the constant support I provided. I couldn't remember a single instance. The next morning, I called Dr. Martinez, a therapist recommended by my physician. During our first session, I found myself describing my relationship with Catherine in terms that made it sound like a job rather than a family bond. Over the following weeks, Dr. Martinez helped me see patterns I had been blind to for decades. She explained how my well-intentioned support had created a dynamic where Catherine had no incentive to develop independence. The hardest part was accepting that my identity as a devoted mother had become unhealthy for both Catherine and myself. I had confused love with enablement, support with control, and devotion with self-sacrifice. Dr. Martinez introduced me to the concept of boundaries, something I had never learned to establish. I began practicing small boundaries. When Catherine called during dinner, I let it go to voicemail. When she asked for money for non-essential expenses, I suggested she adjust her budget. When she launched into complaints about her job, I offered empathy but not solutions. Catherine's reaction was swift and intense. She accused me of being unsupportive, uncaring, and different in ways that concerned her. The manipulation was so subtle that it took several conversations with Dr. Martinez to recognize it. Catherine had learned that questioning my love and devotion was an effective way to get me back in line. The real test came 6 months after I started therapy. Catherine called me crying about a fight with her boyfriend and a conflict at work. She needed me to come over immediately to help her figure out what to do. I told her I was sorry she was having a difficult day, but I had plans that evening and couldn't come over. Catherine's response was unlike anything I had experienced. She became furious, accusing me of abandoning her when she needed me most. She hung up on me, and we didn't speak for 2 weeks. When Catherine finally called, it was to inform me that she had decided I was going through some kind of midlife crisis and was willing to forgive my recent behavior if I would go back to being the mother she needed. I told Catherine that I loved her deeply but that our relationship needed to become more balanced. I explained that I could no longer be her primary source of emotional support and financial assistance. Catherine's reaction was devastating. She told me that if I wasn't willing to be the mother she needed, then maybe we shouldn't have a relationship at all. Catherine left that conversation and didn't contact me for 3 months. It was the most difficult period of my adult life. I had spent 34 years defining myself primarily as Catherine's mother, and suddenly that relationship was on hold indefinitely. Harold was supportive, but also relieved. I started slowly, joining a book club at the local library and taking a watercolor painting class. These activities felt strange at first because I kept thinking about whether Catherine would approve. Gradually, I began to remember parts of myself that had been dormant for decades. I also began spending more time with Harold, reconnecting with the man I had married but had somewhat neglected. For the first time in decades, I woke up in the morning and thought about what I wanted to do with my day rather than what Catherine might need from me. When Catherine finally contacted me, it was because she was facing eviction and needed financial help. She called as if our 3-month silence had never happened, immediately asking me to lend her money for back rent. I told Catherine that I was sorry she was in a difficult situation, but that I couldn't provide financial assistance. Catherine was incredulous. She couldn't believe I would let her become homeless when I had the means to help her. The conversation was painful, but I held firm. Catherine managed to avoid eviction by borrowing money from friends and taking on additional work hours. She was furious with me, but she also proved that she was capable of solving her own problems when she had no other choice. Over the following year, our relationship slowly evolved. Catherine would call less frequently, and usually only when she wanted something specific. But gradually, something shifted. Without my constant intervention, Catherine began developing problem-solving skills she had never needed before. Our relationship today is different from what I had imagined, but it's healthier than it has ever been. Catherine and I talk once or twice a week, and our conversations are more balanced. She's learned to manage most of her problems independently, though she still sometimes asks for advice. Catherine is 36 now, and has been in a stable relationship for over a year. Her boyfriend seems to appreciate her strengths without enabling her weaknesses, and she appears to be happier than she has been in years. My relationship with Harold has strengthened significantly. We've traveled more in the past 2 years than we had in the previous decade. I continue seeing Dr. Martinez monthly, working on maintaining healthy boundaries and developing a stronger sense of self. The hardest lesson has been accepting that I can't control other people's happiness or success, even when those people are my children. I spent decades trying to make Catherine's life easier, but I couldn't actually make her happy or functional. Only she could do that work. At 71, I'm still discovering who I am, when I'm not defined by my role as Catherine's mother. I'm learning to paint watercolors, reading books that challenge my thinking, and forming friendships based on mutual interest rather than one-sided service. The morning I threw away Catherine's baby shoes, I was cleaning out closets and found the small white sneakers I had saved from her first steps. For decades I had kept them as a symbol of my love for her, but holding them that day, I realized they had become a symbol of my inability to let her grow up. I threw them away, not out of anger or resentment, but as an act of liberation. I was finally ready to stop mourning the little girl who had needed me completely and start appreciating the adult woman Catherine was becoming. Today, I wake up thinking about my own day, my own interests, my own possibilities. I love Catherine deeply, but that love no longer requires the sacrifice of my own identity. The relationship I have with Catherine now isn't the one I dreamed of when she was born, but it's honest and sustainable, in ways our old dynamic never was.